So, welcome to Best Practice, a show where we interview leaders in the building industry to unpack the tools, tactics, and strategies they use to run great organizations. Today, my colleague at Monograph, Chris Morgan, and myself are very pleased to welcome two principals at Olson Kundig. We now have this team where we're kind of this theme of bringing two people on board to chat. So this is really great. Very excited for this conversation. We have Alan Maskin, who's one of the 6 owners of the firm, and Jerry Garcia, principal at Olson Kundig. And they're going to join us today for a fireside chat with a little bit of background on Olson Kundig. It's a 200-person collaborative design practice in Seattle that's recognized nationally and internationally for the design of its projects and design culture in the office. Evidence of their acclaim is the fact that I think we've reached the limit of this Zoom plan based on registrants, which is pretty exciting. So a little bit of background on each of them. Alan has a remarkable story, which I think we'll touch a little bit upon, from starting as an arts educator, going from there to starting his architecture career at 30, to joining Olson Kundig to run the IT department, not the kind of traditional route by any means, and then ultimately joining the partnership at Olson Kundig and leading cultural projects. He's been awarded first place in multiple international design competitions, and he leads a team of architects, designers, visual artists, and researchers, a very kind of hodgepodge of different types of people, which we'll probably talk about as well. We also have Jerry Garcia, as I mentioned, the principal, where he focuses on the dialogue between architecture, art, and community at large. He has collaborated with world-renowned artists such as Anish Kapoor, Jaume Plencia, and Doug Aitken in installations in both public and private realms. So one more thing, special thanks to Ryan Patterson, who previously worked at Olson Kundig and now works at Folsom Singh in Richmond, Virginia. He actually originally connected us to Alan to organize this conversation, and he also highly recommended Jerry Garcia to join, as he considers Jerry a mentor. So very special. So with that, I think I'd just like to thank you both for joining us.
Thank you so much, George. Total pleasure to be here.
Yeah. And I think Chris might have a couple questions he has a little bit lined up from previous feedback he was getting through Instagram. So Chris, if you want to take it away.
Sure. Thank you again, Alan, Jerry. It's a huge pleasure to have you on here. Seeing that we're all tuning in remotely, but preparing to return back to the office in different capacities, everyone across the world. I was hoping that you could talk through the space in the office at Olson Kundig and how the space supports the different cultural programs that the office has been running.
Sure. So if we were all walking in the space today, and the tour of the office is actually something that happens many times a day, probably with every new potential client or people who visit us. And we've gotten this feedback that the tour of the office is actually one of the things that actually describes who we are and what we're about the best. And so if you're going to imagine in your heads when you arrive, it's a 100-year-old building called the Washington Shoe Building. So it's in the oldest area of Seattle, which is in Pioneer Square. When you arrive, you enter into this space. The very first, after encountering the person at the door that welcomes you and offers you something cold or warm to drink, you then see a long, long table filled with architectural models from over 5 decades of work that just always seem to stay, and it represents the types of work that we do. But when we moved into our space probably a dozen years ago from another place in Pioneer Square, and Tom Kundig designed the initial version of the space, and it was really important to him to have the interns who are part of an international internship program that we've been running for almost 25 years to be located there. So there's a dozen people who have traveled literally from all over the world to come in and work with us, recently graduated design students for the most part. And so you literally see them building physical models, and also, and they're working on teams. And so that the images, the renderings, things like that, they're visually doing some of the most interesting work in the office. When you wander into a little bit further into the space, there's a couple of boxes that we call shoe boxes that are a reference to the original shoe building, and they have these kinetic aspects to them. There's a very large piazza that's filled with kinetic furniture that tables and chairs that can move and be reorganized so that all 200 of us can be together for a Monday morning all hands meeting. And they also can turn into bleachers so that they actually can be reconstructed and people can literally build them for whatever types of meetings they want to have. But most of the office is an open plan. It's made out of plywood. We put a lot of our sort of design dollars into creating a kinetic piece that is sort of the highlight of the tour in many respects. And we work with Phil Turner, who's a part wizard, part engineer, who literally will work with almost any team that wants to make some part of their building move or kinetic or change. And when you walk out onto this bridge, you literally move these levers that connect to the water system in the city of Seattle. And then the water actually moves into pistons that raises a skylight up into the air that allows the warm air to go through. It's a heat chimney of sorts. It's visually incredibly beautiful. There's a wall there to catch shadows as they move across the Pacific Northwest sky. And it's sort of the sort of heart and soul of taking something that didn't exist anywhere else and turning it into a design commodity that has many, many functions.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that. And that's on the main floor. And then as you go downstairs to the 5th floor, our office has consists of 3 floors. That's where I sit on the 5th floor, right adjacent to the stairs. And I actually sit right next to Jim Olson, the founder of the office. And I don't know, maybe 6 years ago, we were doing some renovation to our desks, to some of the seating workstations. And Jim told the carpenter, he said, put a shelf in between Jerry and I, and we're going to put interesting things on it. And so from that start, we created our own art venue called The Ledge. And we've been inviting world-renowned artists, really, really amazing artists from various parts to make work to place on our shelf. That then we have an opening. Its invitation is only for staff, for our colleagues, and we invite the artist. The artist creates work. We treat it like a big opening with refreshments and food, and the artist introduces the work. And it's been really rewarding because I've collected artwork for 30 years. Jim's collected artwork for 50 years, and we do so many homes and institutions that are centered around art. And we feel like living with art really provides an insight that you just can't get from a single museum experience or a gallery experience. So we wanted to have work that would live with us and work with us for months. And then from that, perhaps we get some insight into the work itself and to how to best create environments for artwork. And it may seem like a little thing, but it was really fun when Oscar Toison, the great sculptor, had his show. That same week, the same body of work was on the cover of Art in America. So it kind of also gave, this kind of credibility, which in that, if you treat something as though it's important, you give it that reverence, it shows, it just shows. And so I think it tells a lot about Jim Olson and kind of the beginning of our practice.
I'm curious about just kind of the way it's being described, at least the journey of being taken through. I'm assuming there's multiple, as you were saying, there's multiple tours given throughout the day for potential recruits, potential clients. Is that like narrative intentional to some degree? Like, are there like, you mentioned even the detail of like, the first thing they're done is given a refreshment, right? It almost sounds like a lot of that is very curated.
It probably sounds more choreographed than it actually is, George, in all honesty. I mean, I think that a lot of the things that we're probably going to talk about today didn't necessarily start as an intentional strategy, but that they sort of evolved into one. And so there was this sort of interesting discovery for us in that the design for your own office could in fact be a mirror or a reflection of who you are to the world in many respects. And there's many, many other layers and people that we haven't covered here that are like equally interesting and kind of surprising as you wander through the space. But there's no offices. It's a wide open plan. Jerry mentioned he sits next to Jim. Tom's on the 6th floor. Kirsten's on the 4th floor. Kevin's on the 5th. Like we're all pretty spread out, and we're in the landscape of all the coworkers. So there's a good aspect of mentorship that happens in that scenario where you just overhear conversations and think, or you used to, and we will again, just the ability to sort of overhear what people are doing, how they do it.
Yeah.
And so it's designed intentionally for sort of that to be a space where that can happen.
But George, to follow up on that, George, I was just in Guadalajara. I was having dinner with these great architects, Macias and Peredo, and they actually toured our office. And during dinner, they just brought up how much they enjoyed that office tour. And I think it is that our work is rather there's a clarity and a precision to our work, to the built work, and there's perhaps a lack of clarity and precision to our office. You know, you can kind of provides insight into how we think and how we collaborate and how we work. And I think that's what's kind of you just feel it. You walk into the space and it's just a nice place to work. It just feels right.
I wonder if sorry.
Go ahead, George.
I'm very curious if there's a piece of this too. Am I correct to assume that is the building itself owned by the company? Because I'm
no,
it's not.
Yeah, no.
So all the interventions that happen into this, or that seem to happen into this, is like not necessarily. I mean, in other words, I think about like places like New York, right, where it might be harder to pull off some of these type of interventions, right?
I think timing is everything. And when we were looking for a new office, it was during a previous recession, and especially in Pacific Northwest, when the sort of tech collapse happened, which you can imagine in a city that has the level of technology companies like Seattle, it was really profound. And so the original space we're in was going to be somebody's apartment, actually. And then, so not only were we able, and they had just redone the building and nobody was leasing. So not only were we their first tenants, but also they were extremely amenable to have a tenant, and also to the kinds of things that we wanted to do. And I think they realized, you know, we're an architecture firm, so we're probably going to improve this space in a way that would be beneficial to them. And so, and you know, there was a TI budget that we got to work with, and so on. So, and if we were doing it today, would we be able to put a hole in the roof and connect to the water system and have a skylight? I'm not so sure, but at the time, we certainly could.
I also want to follow up on what Alan was saying, though, in that we oftentimes, you know, we're kind of renowned for our gizmos, but the gizmos, they really matter when they're doing more than one thing. And the fact is that the skylight above our stair, it doesn't just open just to open. It opens because it allows our entire office to function without air conditioning in the middle of summer. And it's kind of like, it provides that chimney effect to kind of exhaust all the hot air. And the other thing that I love about the skylight is, you know, of course, it's going to center, you know, in the middle, you gather in the light. But in the wintertime in Seattle, when you go to work when it's dark and you leave when it's dark, it's actually quite beautiful, because then it's the darkest place in the entire office. So it's like not just as a device, as like this construct, but actually in terms of how it engages with the environment, it just keeps leading you there. And I think that that's one of those things to where you see that it's not just for the mechanical act, but in terms of how it helps you engage with the environment, the people, that resonates with people, and that kind of brings it home in terms of what the practice is about.
I'm really curious to hear about some of the founding history of the different programs at the office. What's so fascinating is the office predates both of you. You joined as the office was going along and had already set up a cultural foundation, and yet you've founded and evolved some of these programs over many, many years. I'm curious to hear, what was it like when you joined, and what were the foundations that were in place, and then what did you add on?
It's a great point to make, which is that the firm not only had predated both of our arrival, but it had by decades. And you know, Jim Olson started in the late '60s, and many of us were drawn to the firm for, you know, already because of different aspects of how Jim worked and how Tom worked and so on. I joined and there were 25 people, and now we're at 200. So that gives you a sense of scale. And there was a number. Pardon my dog. He's going to help me out on this occasionally. Baxter, hang on. But when I started, there was a Monday morning meeting that had just begun, which was an all hands meeting. That still happens today, but it has much, much more layers and depth than it did when it originally started. We also had, and this is the most important thing that we do as a culture, which is every Thursday at 4:30, we put down we close computers, we put pencils down, we join in that piazza space I told you about, and one or two projects will be presented, or a theme or a concept, and the entire office gets to chime in. There's beer and there's food to sort of help get everybody like to that meeting. But literally you can be an intern that arrived from Mumbai the day before, or Jim Olson, who's been there since the 60s, and everybody gets to participate in the conversation, and it's a design conversation. And so it improves projects, it improves thinking, it pushes everybody, and it is the most critical sort of ritual that we have, and we are religious about it. It happens without fail. So that was the landscape when I started. Shortly after I started, I got involved in creating the International Internship Program, which was another interesting piece, and then a speaker series, which Jerry and I both are reinvigorating at the moment, but that's 25 years later as well. So, and that's held in our Monday morning meeting, and once a month we invite people in, and we will be inviting people in from around the world to inspire the people that work there to do great work by seeing the examples of people doing amazing things in disciplines, for the most part, other than architecture. And so it's been this incredibly interesting series. And now we're going to be pretty soon this year, keep your eye out for it, if it sounds interesting to you guys, but we're going to be inviting anybody into our office for that meeting virtually. And our speakers will also reflect, hopefully, a sort of more global range. Jerry, do you want to describe when you arrived?
Sure. I joined, the office was probably about 65 people. And beyond the ledge, so the art venue is called the Ledge. That's one of my Gemini's contributions to the culture. Another thing we did was, there is kind of a slide presentation venue called Pechakucha, you can call it whatever you want. But I had gone to one right after joining the office, and I was sitting next to Stephen Rainville, who's a fellow principal, who's like just an astonishing architect. And I was just telling him how horrible it was, how to kind of you go to a bar and you have these people who are designers and artists and what have you. They just present slides and just try to impress everybody. So everyone's kind of impressing or trying to impress everybody. And it was just a horrible venue, a horrible event. And so Stephen said, well, why don't you just hold one here? And so the whole idea was that instead of being in a venue, you kind of invert this condition to where you're at a neutral venue, and you have all these strangers presenting their art, their work to other strangers to try to impress them. What about if you have your colleagues, the people that you spend more time than probably you do with your partner? What about you have them presenting work or something about themselves that you might never know? And so we started just doing this, and now I think we've done 22 of them over the years. And they've just been really rewarding in terms of providing people an opportunity to present another side of themselves. And during this COVID time, we've continued them. And during this COVID time, to where we've been growing, and we have employees, we have fellow staff and colleagues that we haven't even met in person yet. And so the last Pechakucha was all people that have been hired since the beginning of the pandemic. So we're seeing these presentations by our colleagues who we didn't even know yet, haven't really gotten to know yet. So that's been another kind of rewarding thing. And then lastly, the crit. You know, I actually learned this from Alan. I was asked if I would help kind of steward the crits. And the first thing I did was invite six of the most talented people in the office to kind of help. And so we kind of collectively work as a crew. And and also we wanted this to continue during COVID. So there are a few things that were difficult, right? I don't think you can understate how having nice wine and cheese for the taking at a crit, how valuable that was and enticing people to drop by the crypt before heading home. And so you have a venue in which you're working remotely. So what's the incentive for people to actually take the time out of a very busy day to commit to crit? And so we thought, you know what, when the office was 25 people, it made sense to crit one project when maybe there was 12 projects in the entire office. But now when there are 200, how do we maximize the impact of this kind of venue within our practice? And so we decided to do crits, multiple projects. So we do crits of 4 different projects by 4 different owners during the same crit. You know, or we would just have a theme in terms of hospitality or site planning within residential architecture. So we just try to keep it kind of dynamic. We even did a very successful crit called Cribs. It was called OK Crit Cribs. And we actually had people kind of share where they live and where they were spending the pandemic. And again, really beautiful productions. And again, just trying to find ways that we can kind of get to know each other better in a way that's that only happens when you create a venue that's outside of the kind of the day-to-day. So that's what I've done or tried.
That's awesome. I'm thinking about how there's also lots of other programs that we haven't mentioned yet, and you can explore this on Olson Kundig's website. But something that's kind of occurred to me even before this live presentation, we were talking about the alumni of Olson Kundig. I'm curious to what degree Olson Kundig is like an architecture school. Like, how different is it? Because it seems like in a lot of ways it's very similar. There's actually a quote from a conversation that Alan had, an interview that Alan had that's just excellent on the background of Alan's history. And he had this interesting point, which was, can you affect the world through design more by being a designer or by being a design educator? And Alan was also an arts educator before becoming an architect. So I'd love to hear about how close Olson Kundig is to an architecture school.
You know, I think it's an interesting question, Chris, and it's we are very much a practice. We are, you know, we have many projects. We're crazy ambitious about where we want to go, the things we want to do, how we want to keep evolving as a design firm. You know, we're going into our 6th decade. Like, that's a very long time to have the window open. And so in that regard, I think it's we really we're a business, and we're trying to provide excellent service and really high quality design. And so that is the main premise for what we do. The quote that you gave was in reference to a professor that Tom and I both had back when we were architecture students. She ran a foreign study program, and it was in Rome, and Stephen Hall studied there, Ed Weinstein, Tom and I both studied there, and it occurred to, and as well as like hundreds of like architects, landscape architects, or people that work in the urban realm, artists, and she had this incredible effect. I mean, I just finished a remodel of Seattle's Space Needle. So many of the ideas from that project track to that teacher and that experience. And so I think that's true of all of us. We carry with us the lessons that we learned in design school. And there are some components of that, like the crit, which definitely feels like a studio crit. And it certainly carries over from that tradition in architecture, and the ways that we sort of come together. But and the last piece is that mentorship is huge for us. And so we created an internship program so that we could actually provide teaching and training to people at the beginning of their careers. And so there is an educational piece for sure that carries into what we do. But I also would say that at the end of the day, we are really, really excited to be making interesting and cool projects.
Yeah, and I'll add on to it in terms of, I worked with this co-op of artists, architects, poets, and industrial designers that founded their own city on the Chilean coast, probably over 50 years ago. And a lot of them were professors at the Catholic University. I taught at the Catholic University also. But they had, I think it was at the 50-year anniversary, they built this structure in the dunes. And one of the introductions was that may all their ex-students remove X in front of students. And that always struck me. And so I think when it comes to teaching and mentoring, for me personally, I think the first thing I do is kind of just make it pretty explicit that I'm still just a student and I'm still just learning. And I'm kind of complicit in this pursuit of something that's unattainable, but we just keep trying to get better and better at.
So there's some aspects of this our conversation has really been around like these rituals of sorts, right? Or these,
Yep.
Chris is referring to programs and such. And I'm wondering how do you look at culture also from like the lens of like who you bring onto the team, right? As a 200-person company, every new person that you add to the company changes sort of the DNA to some capacity, right? They bring their own experiences, whatnot, especially in open platforms where you're talking about design feedback, right? Even the critique itself is another avenue where you probably see this a lot, right? Different people's ideas
Yep.
play out. How do you, in the hiring process itself, what are the good signals to you in the sense of for that piece that this person might be a good, and cultural fit could have its own biases, but even then still just like what are you looking for in terms of the attitudes, perspectives of that person that okay, like they can gel in this environment and actually be a net positive in some way, right?
Yeah. We have a team of people that actually works on hiring, and obviously we've been hiring for decades, and so there are certain things that actually we do look for, and I think for the most part, portfolio is huge. We're looking for we're really fortunate, George. We have an amazingly talented group of people that work with Olson Kundig, and they now come from all over the world, and it's a pretty extraordinary bunch, and I wouldn't get hired today if that came up. I mean, they just it's kind of staggering. Just
certainly not for IT.
You what?
Certainly not for. I said certainly not for IT. Like you got in the first time.
Right, which was how I snuck in the door the first time.
Yeah.
But I think we're looking for certain things. I think we're looking for people that are going to be generous, that are going to learn new things, but also being able to sort of share new things as well. And so people that are self-aggrandizing or kind of trying to climb their way to top or be competitive, I think if you can sense that vibe in an interview, then that usually doesn't work for us. And so if there's evidence of people who have worked on things, volunteered for things, been involved in certain types of programs that show that, or been teachers themselves, to us, those are indicators that that's a person that could fit really well. But at the end of the day, where is their passion for design, and does it work with ours? And so I think that's probably the biggest thing.
Yeah, Alan, I want to bring up, unless Jerry, you have something.
I just wanted to tell just a quick story, just as far as when I was being hired. I had recently completed a very important project for myself that was ground up, amazing clients, amazing site, everything. But I was talking to Tom. I was actually competing against Tom for a project at the time. And we were talking about the work. We were talking about maybe being able to work at Olson Kundig. And there was a point that there was all the photos of the project I finished, I was super proud of. It had been the culmination of my entire practice up to that point. And it was so beautiful that there was a point he said, if you worked here, and he pointed at it, this would be better. And at that moment, it was just like, hell yeah, I'm in, I'm all in, And I think that's another thing that I think that we look for are people that have accomplished really amazing things in their own right, whether it's academically or with other firms, but also want to just keep learning and want to keep pushing it and kind of learn from each other.
I love that anecdote. Just if only because that could have gone two different ways.
Completely.
Your answer could have gone two different ways. And I think that is the other answer obviously is like offensive, right? You're offended.
Yeah.
Right? Your ego's hurt. Like, what do you mean? Like, it's going to be better? Of course not. But a beautiful anecdote, because I think that, we at Monograph, I think we have very similar values in the sense of like who we look for. And I think that's a big part of it. The kind of continuously learning aspect is critical to us as well. So really beautiful anecdote.
Alan, I want to pick two little words or phrases that I think are unique that I picked up from this interview that I listened to on Archinect, and also what you just mentioned just now, which is being extremely generous with your colleagues, like that generosity. And at the same time, there's another phrase that I love that you use, because I saw you used it twice, so it must be something remarkable. What's funny is we had a conversation at Monograph a couple of days ago. We were discussing our favorite animals, and a few people mentioned elephants. And I have a sense that an elephant is your favorite animal because it's showed up in a lot of ways in your projects, and you've even used the phrase being the elephant in the room. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you think about the elephant in the room, and then this other idea of being extremely generous with your colleagues.
Well, I never brought those two things together, and so I think it's kind of interesting. But I have, in fact, done a number of elephants in work in parks and installations and other things around the world. And so, and you know, I'll be honest, I like to go big scale, and so it's and you can't get much bigger than an elephant. And so that in that regard, when the elephant is in the room, you can't miss it. And I think that's how it switches over to the metaphor that you're asking about, which is there are some times when an individual or an idea will be in a room, and I personally do my best work when I'm surrounded by people who are smarter than me and more creative than I am. And put me in a room with 5 people that meet that criteria, and I do. I just sort of know how to function in some levels. And so, and every so often there will be a sense and someone will emerge and it will be just undeniable. Like, we have to go in that direction, or that person has to be seen. You guys mentioned Ryan Patterson at the beginning, and Chris, I know you went to school with him, and he was important to you. And actually he connected us for this. And Ryan was with us for 4 years, and this is an example of someone that was a pretty clear elephant, actually. Ryan, Instagram was just getting rolling, and probably a year or 2 in to the platform being created. And we were sort of like, should architecture firms do this? Should they engage? How would they engage? And then someone sort of came up to me and said, you know, that new guy, he's got 35,000 followers. And so it was literally like sitting down with that person who was so clearly the most talented person that could have walked in our door and say, okay, we're going to hand this to you. You've been here for less than a year, and we're going to ask you to take this and develop it, create the voice, create the original vision. Now, currently it's been, you know, it's evolved, and many others are participating, and it's taken it to other levels, but you know, it went from 0 to 140,000 people. And it's because of just recognizing that level of talent. So that happens every day in many, many ways in the firm, but that's one example.
Oh, that's amazing. I'm thinking of I'm really glad, Jerry, that you brought up your experience as an experienced architect joining the firm, because that was actually an audience question that came in as well ahead of the talk, which was, of course, Olson Kundig has this amazing internship program, but what is the sort of feeling of joining as an experienced architect? How do they, you know, collaborate with the new staff? How do you join that culture that's already established, and you're already an established person? Some firms will say that they look for, particularly for younger staff, because they're more easily molded, let's say. But I mean, a different way of thinking about this is the diversity of contribution can be stronger when you're bringing on more advanced, more experienced people, all, you know, vertically at any level of the firm.
Yeah, actually, I think that I think there's something really special about the office in general, and that is that really, if you look at the entire ownership group, that's a group that spent a lot of time together, decades together, that really learned what architecture is within the offices of Olson Kundig. You know, so and these you know, the owners really, they can speak in shorthand to each other. They just know each other so well. They trust each other. When they're working on projects together, they really collaborate deeply. And then a lot of the time, you know, historically, we've had people have really succeeded coming in young, learning what it is to be Olson Kundig, and again, ascending to partnership or to partners or principals or associates, what have you. But actually, our office is different now. Our office, and so I was an anomaly. I was an anomaly to come in with, 12 years, 13 years experience, or however much I had at the time. But now that's actually the level of collaborator that we're looking for the most. We are actually wanting people who have very clear ideas in terms of what architecture is, the tectonics of architecture, the collaborative nature of it, and what it is to kind of steward it. Those are actually the people that we are actually the most interested in engaging at this point, because we have astonishing opportunities. The type of projects that walk through our door are just they say a lot about the work that Tom and Jim have been doing for 50 years, right? So I think it's super welcomed, and I think that it's part of that. Alan always says, always has that premise, like, what can we do together that we couldn't do separately? And I think that when it comes to the actual practice, we now more than ever are actively engaged in trying to find out what that looks like. So yeah, it's fun that maybe my instincts aren't all consistent with the Tom Kundig, but there's room. There's room for me, and there's room for my colleagues within the practice, for sure.
I'm curious also to know a bit more about the separation between, let's say, or if there is one or not, between, like, let's say, design management, or, like, let's say, which is in the pursuit of, like, really great projects, excellent execution, versus, let's say, more of the people management, and is there a distinction between both? Like, maybe you can walk us a little bit through, like, how the actual teams are organized and structured, and what are the opportunities there for, that generosity and feedback, and how does that happen generally? I'm very curious.
I think that for the most part, and there's anomalies all over the studio, but for the most part, each project would have an owner. So one of the owners of the firm, or a principal or a leader in the firm, that is sort of overseeing and doing the client management, but also working with the team in the development of the design as well. And so I think that that's the main structure. And there's almost always a project manager and a project architect. And there's a lot of training that happens. There's something called, the principal group has been creating a number of initiatives in the firm around, there's something called OKU, for example, where there literally is training for people, especially new people, even if they're experienced. And we, as Jerry said, we sort of love people that really know how to put buildings together, know how to detail projects, and know how to take a big idea and actually deliver it. And so, but there's a lot of places where they can actually sort of check into the ways that the firm has been doing it for quite some time. But they also get to sort of add on. So new blood comes in, and actually it can sort of fly to the head of the pack and take us in a different direction, purely because, like, wow, again, elephant in the room, like this is so much better. Why wouldn't we do it this way? And so there is that sort of ebb and flow in terms of the project. And then interns are brought on the projects often for visuals and other aspects to sort of support the teams as well. So that's a general sort of team structure that kind of moves through each project for the most part.
Yeah, but George, I will say this, as far as just being, one of the principals, we really are, and Jim Olson taught me this very early on, in that sometimes you actually have to be a little bit more formal than you might think you need to be in order to allow for the kind of the openness and the freedom of movement that you really want to have happen. And so, so we as a group, we kind of divvy up responsibilities in terms of, some people are much better with people, some people are much better with buildings, some people are much better with prospective clients. We really kind of divvy up that kind of the framework of that discussion with regard to the, how the office operates, in order to provide some more runway for people, So we've had to kind of do a little bit more of that work in order to allow people to have a lot more room to make a larger impact individually within the office.
Yeah, in the tech world, we talk a lot about kind of individual contributors versus let's say management, right? Like, there's different tracks for people. Some people just really don't ever want to look to have to manage teams in a different way, like which is more the people, the motivation, what makes them work, career path, a lot of some, and there should be a room and a track for those people that just really care about like their craft in a sense, right?
And that's been a big topic of discussion within this office for a while now, because for the long, it was true when I joined, and it had to have been true when Alan joined, that we took pride in being generalists. We took pride in being able to do it all. I know when I had my own firm, that was the same thing. I was very kind of defiant in terms of saying, oh, I can do it all. And the fact is that within this firm, you no longer, actually for the good of the firm, it's kind of essential that everyone not be able to do everything, and that people just be able to focus on the aspects of their practice that are exemplary, and that provide them, each of them, the most reward and growth. So and that's the thing. I think that both Alan and I are kind of poster children, or certainly not children, poster people in terms of how you can. I mean, we each have practices right now that there's not a parallel practice that exists in the world. It's only within Olson Kundig that we can actually do what we do on a normal basis. And so that's pretty remarkable. And I think that that's also capable of any other practicing architect or designer within our office.
Sort of on a related note, do you have a conscious anxiety about, as the firm grows, it becomes too corporate or too structured? You mentioned anomalies and allowing that, but how do you think about that? Does the partnership talk about that? Did the principal group talk about that? What is it like? How much is it on your mind?
We tend to, for as long, I've been a sort of an owner for a while, and we always are like, whenever the firm has grown, we've been like, okay, that's it. We are not getting any bigger than this. And then this really amazing work will come along, and it's like, we have to do this. And then it requires more people and more talent, and it sort of relates to where we are at the moment in terms of our size. And so, but it was never a sort of conscious sort of growth pattern. It was all more like, how do we sort of get to sort of, doing some of the most interesting, getting to work on some of the most interesting projects that are available or out there. And so that's been this kind of dance. I don't think that, we don't spend an enormous amount of time trying to not be or appear. I mean, we are a corporation, and this is what, Gloria Steinem, this is what a corporation looks like. It's, and the fact that it can have interesting aspects and facets. I mean, right now we've made probably one of the biggest business changes we certainly in the history of the firm, which is we now have a CEO named HP Parwani, who is on Mount Everest as we speak. So sending him good energy that he comes back. But he began as a CFO and working on operations. And suddenly we realized we used to have architects running everything. They were running the management, they were running the finances. And suddenly it was, why wouldn't we have someone that really understood that aspect of the firm and the running of the firm? And it's been hugely successful. And so does that make us more corporate on some levels? But it also relieves us to work on the things that we're genuinely good at, which is the design of projects.
Yeah, I'll say this in response to that. I know that, again, there is this complexity with regard to working with 200 human beings. There's kind of a burden to that, maybe, there's a weight, a gravity to that. But I'll say this, is that our owners will go to the map and really make decisions with kind of their heart, and really go for it with design. It's not a kind of a passive passion. It's a passionate decision. And so we as people within the firm, we know that the owners ultimately care the most about doing the most meaningful and impactful work possible. And that heart that's kind of omnipresent, to me, is the thing that's what I connect to and go, okay, this is still some really passionate, special people working on passionate, special projects. that are going to really push design. So the minute that goes, then I would be wary. But that's been consistent my entire time at Olson Kundig.
What's been one of the changes that happened as a result of bringing HP on board in the ownership team?
I think one of the biggest things is that it has, someone that actually has an MBA and a background in business and knows how organizations function, has brought together a sort of, just the entire whole business operations and our legal operations and our contracts and our HR operations that are, again, for the most part, a lot of that culture was related to, not in every instance, but certainly architects doing projects and also doing these other tasks. And so that culturally has been the biggest change. And I have a feeling that, our coworkers were, scratching their heads and wondering about this, but there are a number of other certainly firms that we know have gone in this direction, and it's been really a successful move. I was describing it to a colleague yesterday. She was asking me about it, or someone that I'm going to give a lecture with, and she was, after we talked about it, she was like, "Well, why doesn't every firm do this?" Because it actually makes so much sense. And so, but he's a rare case, and he's ideal because he fits our culture beautifully. He's incredibly smart, incredibly warm. This can be very tough when we need to be, but also, he's climbing a mountain because it's a personal goal of his that he's tried several times, and this time he's going to get there. I know it. And so that kind of aspiration, that works for us.
Another part of that, Chris, is just logistics in terms of, we're a really oddball firm right now in the world, right? That there's 200 of us, and even to this day, half of our work is residential. So it's such an unusual mix, but that also means that it's we have an unusually high, relatively speaking, number of projects. So that's a whole lot of contracts. That's a lot of business. It's a lot of stuff to have to manage. And so it's nice, at least from me, from a personal standpoint, to not have to kind of hawk the contracts as much as I used to in the past, right? And have to kind of be as responsible for that as I was in the past as a practitioner. So from that standpoint, it's just like, there's just a lot going on in this office, and we need as much help as possible to be able to focus on the architecture.
Thanks a lot. I'm gonna start shifting the conversation to the Q&A. So we've got a ton of questions in here. I'm going to try to filter out some of these. So and select one. One question was about how you run your Thursday crits to encourage others to speak up. Like, how do you make it so that it doesn't just default to like the leadership team?
Yeah. So I'm gonna say two words that are a little controversial, but I'm gonna say Joe Rogan. And I'm gonna say Joe Rogan because having to do these crits remotely has been really, really rewarding. And it's been rewarding because, like you say, in a physical space with 200 people, or 150 people reviewing a project, that's not conducive to certain people feeling comfortable speaking up. But what happens now is that during crits, we're presenting crits remotely, but the chat column off to the side, that chat column in our crits, it just explodes because anyone can contribute at any time, right? And I mentioned the Joe Rogan thing. The Joe Rogan thing that I think it was super interesting was beyond the 3-hour kind of interview, which is fascinating in terms of getting past just the superficial, is that whenever someone brings up a topic, the producer will just look up a topic on the internet, and then they'll just talk about it. And that's so different than any other talk show. And so all of a sudden then people can not only, so we can learn, like our crits, we are now collectively learning real time the way that people learn. You learn by instantly starting to search and do image, and we're doing that collectively. And then, so I think that I think this aspect to our crits will remain the same. I think that when we go back to the office, we're actually the majority of us will probably be in the main space, but I think that we're going to have live. We're going to also do it over Teams and have people contributing to the chat who are still maybe at their desks, you know, still having to work away, but participating remotely, and still have that kind of to provide a bit of porosity for people to contribute real time. But
I think we've also really used the crit in many ways to sort of reinforce like specific things about design that we want to know. So sometimes a design team will come in and they will have really clear questions where they feel stuck and they want people to actually participate in that regard. I think that we've used them for design competitions when we're like, okay, we're working on the Bob Dylan Center, we're competing for it. We had a model making session where at the end of that 4 hours, and people stayed, and we put music on, and they just, you know, kept building site models, and we ended up with 50 models that we were able to use in our submittal to go forward. Similar for an amazing conversation when we were going after the Pulse Memorial, for example. Just really sort of heartfelt and emotional, like in terms of what this could mean to people. And so it becomes that space where we get to actually really sort of ask sometimes very specific questions, but also what we get back is so tangible that it can actually really be used for the efforts as well.
Yeah, to allow the crit to evolve from being a venue for just reviewing one project to being a venue for establishing this space for discourse within our office is pretty important.
If the team gets up and they just present the project and there's no dialogue, it's not doing what it's supposed to do.
No, not at all.
All right, we have a question about for architecture firms aspiring to pivot their design culture. Do you have any experience or recommendations in how to foster a transformation of the studio? How do you carry the legacy of a firm while transforming? And what is the role of leadership in creating that environment, making it so that the design culture can evolve?
I think it can come from anywhere in the firm. And it literally is like, you know, it's the power of a really good idea. I think the most replicable thing that we're sharing today, because we spent so much time talking about it, is in fact the crit, and that can start small. If you have a pod of people you're working on a project and you invite a couple others in to kind of look at where you are and to give feedback, and build a culture where that feels safe, so that anybody can sort of share their opinions without any sense of repercussion for like being critical, which is sort of so essential. So I think to the practice. But you know, we had design competitions occasionally, where in-house design competitions that people get to work on things. And a few years ago, we had one for an installation in a design festival, and a team came in and they wanted to build the largest ice cube the world had ever seen to point out aspects of climate change and also created this tactile, visceral thing. And they happened to win the in-house competition, and they actually fabricated it and built it, and they connected with a local weatherman who promoted it and created a competition that thousands of people participated in to guess how long the ice cube would last. And thousands of people came literally to this place to see it. And so it's an example where an individual team from our staff was able to actually create a piece of culture that wasn't just internal to us as a firm, but actually was one that our entire community could participate in. So it's two directional, I guess is what it is.
Yeah, I'll also say that like this just happened to me on this site here in Southern California, where I'm at right now. But first visit to the site, and the site was just way more complicated than I thought. I mean, it's a very complicated site. But what we ended up doing today was kind of finding the part of the site that works, and then aligning our efforts within what's working within the existing site. So you kind of you double down and you reinforce what's working, and you kind of expand on that, and then hope that then that expansion continues. But I think the crit's a great idea for sure.
Yeah, we're getting multiple questions around this this topic, and I sense an anxiety of some of the people that are asking this question, because you know the reality is that a lot of people are probably, you know, they're listening to this and they're asking questions because where they currently are at does not have the culture that you're talking about. And so I think in my mind, there's a couple of options. One is it can apply to Olson Kundig and try to.
Well done, George. Well done.
Right. Number two
There's a paper
Um,
bag under your chair, George, if you would just reach down and.
So one is apply there, but also I guess the other, what that just means is like you probably have to look for that firm in your region, in your community that actually shares some of the types of values that you do. And I think actually, you know, it's sort of like you sort of vote through your feet, right? Like by actually like deciding to leave some place. Now, there are obviously different firms and how they operate that don't really, you know, might not even do an exit interview as an example, right? They culturally just might not have that kind of culture. You owe it to yourself to find a place that actually embodies the values that you want to work at.
I'll just from my own practice, I'll just say this. That's one thing that's been effective for me is the first thing I ever did when I started working at Olson Kundig was I started just doing research on every single project Olson Kundig's done, both built and not. I'll even say that two of our favorite crits, we did two crits called Ghost Ship, and they were crits into which people, colleagues in the office would present projects, their favorite projects that they've worked on at Olson Kundig that were never built. Because it's a completely arbitrary thing in terms of which projects get built or not. Some of the best ideas are in the projects that never get built. And so we wanted to kind of bring them back to life to help kind of revisit the concepts and the ideas. And it was so much fun hearing Alan talk about all these projects and Tom, and there was such a reverence and kind of, it made them feel good and excited again. And so I would say that would be one of the things. So I studied it. I would just study the work. And then I would then use some of the ideas in a project to present something, an architecture that maybe looks a little different, but it would be rooted in the same concept or the same intent as one of our projects. And I think that that's one of the ways that you can kind of establish credibility is by showing respect for the work that people have done in the past and how they think. And because ultimately, I think the one thing Tom always says is, I don't care who draws it. And also that it's not about how something looks, but the work it's doing. And I think that there's a lot of flexibility in that.
Hey, George, I think you were heading in this direction, but I think there's a third option to that list you were putting together, which is you can also create it yourself. And so you don't have to sort of get up and leave. You don't have to necessarily go somewhere else. And it can start small. But I think that creating these initiatives wherever you are, and then trying to get some level of buy-in. And, you know, as an owner of a firm, I can't imagine not wanting to be receptive to ideas that would actually improve the culture of my own organization or the design of our projects. And so I'd encourage people to sort of to give that a try. And because I think that there'd be a lot of openness to people's ideas would be my sense.
Yeah, I'll always, I firmly believe like what an amazing business, not only amazing person Jim Olson is, but like what an amazing business sensibility to where he created an office where Tom Kundig could become Tom Kundig within that same office. Tom didn't have to become Tom Kundig somewhere else. He didn't have to leave. There was runway, there was space carved for him. And in terms of purely business, it's formidable to have the same client who wants a Tom Kundig house or a Jim Olson house both come to the same office. So there's a compelling aspect as far as pure business goes to any owner to be able to have options and kind of sensibilities to appeal to more clients.
I mean, that's a really great point, Alan, too, is about internally we talk about how we've noticed through circles. I mean, both Chris and I come from studied architecture. We have friends that work in practice as well. And we talk to a lot of different people. And it seems like one of the best ways in which people have even just done really well for their own career is by taking that initiative, starting there, right? And like whether that's actually putting together a presentation that outlines some new opportunity within the firm, whether it's an operational efficiency and they've kind of like just spent some time to put together a 5-page deck that says, here's the executive summary, here's like 2 paragraphs on like what the challenge is, what the potential solution is, here's a clear roadmap of like timeline for like executing this. Just that alone is, I have found to be like the sort of secret on how to actually like get ahead in a firm. And if obviously if the firm is not receptive to that, then I think that's a clear indication.
I'm really glad you mentioned that. And I think that's where design firms have borrowed from the tech world in some respects, where there's a lot of space for that exact thing, where there literally are carving space for people to think more broadly than just the thing that's due that afternoon, so that they can actually sort of move the needle in their own organization. So, so I share that.
All right, I think we're sort of at time. There's a lot more questions that were asked than our time allotted for. But I do want to end with one last question that I ask every guest. And it always has interesting answers. And so it's for both of you individually. What is the nicest thing anyone has ever done for you?
Jerry, do you want to go first? give me a minute to think. I can go. I've got it.
No,
I've got it.
Oh,
Oh,
good.
sorry.
Go, Alan. Go.
In order to go to architecture school, there's like a lot of answers to that question. But when I was thinking of going to architecture school, I was someone who barely graduated high school. So my math record was I couldn't apply. I had to do 2 years of math, of algebra, geometry, trigonometry, calculus, physics, in order to even apply. And I was living in Cambridge, Massachusetts at the time. And one of my roommates was a postdoc at MIT. She was literally working on her postdoc dissertation, but she would come home at 2 o'clock in the morning in the snow to help me with my geometry homework, so that I could actually get over this hurdle. And so she's now become an amazing scientist living in Paris, but she literally postponed her own education to help me out. And so it's definitely up there in my life as things people have done that was about as kind as you could get. Sorry, Jerry, I cut you off.
No. Mine's just a kind of I don't know. I've just had a consistently rewarding life in terms of people really taking the time with me. So I'll just say to everyone that took the time to kind of actively engage me. So it's good.
That's
what a great question, George.
Yeah, we like to mix it up here. We like to talk a little bit serious and dive a little bit deeply, but I think it's very important to recognize we're at the end of the day we're still human, and that's a big core value of Monograph in general. So thanks for the very generous answers as well. So with that, I just want to thank both of you. I'll kind of just wrap it up by describing a little bit about Monograph, the sponsors and the team that we're a part of here, Chris and I, for those that might not know. So at Monograph, we're building the future of practice operations. We do this for design professionals, which includes architects, landscape architects, and interior designers. We make it very easy for you and your team to understand where your budgets are at in real time, your schedules, your invoices, everything you need to know to be able to effectively answer the question of where am I at right now on a project? And that's really helpful, as you can imagine, for project teams, all the way up to firm owners and operation leaders within companies. And so if you want to see what we're talking about, again, I should remind you, it's designed by architects for architects. Our founding team all studied architecture. And all have had experience at working at different firms like SOM, Kuth Rainieri. I've worked at places like Moss and Arquitectonica, Geo in my landscape days. Yeah, so it has a lot of attention to detail, beautifully designed. And I think you'll understand immediately when you sign up for a free trial. You can also schedule a register for our live demo on Friday, tomorrow, if you go visit our website as well. And with that, just want to thank everyone for joining me. This has been an awesome conversation. I think we could probably be here for several more hours because the questions here are just, they're all over the map. So anyway, I really appreciate it. And maybe we'll have you on next year and we can kind of gauge the progress of where things have been. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. What a pleasure it's been. Thank you, everybody who showed up today. We really appreciate it.
Amazing. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.